Hello there, my very good friends. On today's wrestling news, we've got an update on AEW downsizing venues.
Tony Khan appears to bid farewell to Rampage.
Some big doubts over WWE Raw.
And Bandido is back, and Bandido is injured.
Poor guy. Yeah. I'm Andy.
I'm Michael.
And this is the news. Sleep. Count bodies, not sheep. Let's kick this one off. Big Stout fan, Michael Hampley.
No, you just invented that line. I'll never know that line.
Yeah, so apologies to the city of Baltimore on that one. But shout outs to Stout anyway. Listen, let's talk about AEW and downsizing and venues and stuff like that. It's a big topic. It's been a big topic for... Well, it felt like it was a thing for about 6 months. They should run smaller venues, they should run smaller venues, they should run smaller venues. Now they have run smaller venues, and it was really good. And it sounds like they're going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
So it's almost, it's a good thing in general. Although obviously for your bottom line, you want to be running like 20,000 seater stadiums every week, but if you can't do that, run a smaller one, has more fans, louder than the big empty cavernous basketball arena.
Yeah.
Who cares about looking small time? That's Willie measuring nonsense. But Chris Jericho has spoken about this. And
speaking of which.
Speaking of nonsense. But he makes a bit of sense here, which is, one time out of 100.
Yeah.
He was speaking with Z100 New York. Obviously, being in New York has the advantageous position of doing lots of media.
Yeah.
But he said the following on this matter. I think the worst thing you could ever do in this kind of business is overprice yourself or overextend yourself. We're at a place where we go to some of the middle-sized venues, not in every city, but in some of them, and it's a very smart move. For many reasons, but most importantly, just the vibe of the fans. Like, you want to put 10,000 people into an arena if you can, and if you can, you do that.
Yep.
But if you're down to 5,000, you go to a 4,000-seat arena and increase demand. So, that's what lots of people have been saying for ages. When you ask the question of why AEW didn't do it sooner, the common answer is the set. There's lots of elements of the set that are too big. Also, the small matter of having to book venues like a year in advance. Yeah. You book a big arena, and it's there might be financial considerations if you cancel it and downsize. So I'm sure there were legitimate reasons for them holding back. PW Insider, meanwhile, reporting that coming out of the Hammerstein Ballroom tapings over this weekend, where we had literally every show, including ROH Final Battle. Yeah. Tony Khan said he absolutely loved running the Hammerstein and noted that he would love to come back. This was the first time for a lot of people in AEW to work that venue. So, the Hammerstein in particular is a venue that the true freaks, as in the freaks who were mail ordering Ring of Honor DVDs in 2006, have been pining for AEW to run since launch. Yeah. I think it is slight bugbear with the Hammerstein at the moment, right? The grey paint sucks. Paint it brown and red and stuff again.
Orangey again.
Yeah, that was nice. That was nice. But it's a really cool looking venue, and I thought the shows were much stronger for running there than they would have been in Faceless Basketball Arena number 675.
Yeah, there's a few elements to this, isn't there? I think if you're just coming off the back of this, the time-sensitive version of this is obviously having seen AEW in the Hammerstein, something that people would have wanted back when they could fill out 10 to 15,000 seat arenas. Let's not pretend this is just a best for business thing. People just wanted the visual and the aesthetic and the vibe.
I've been asking for this literally from day one.
Tony Khan is, as you say, a Ring of Honor and an ECW lifer. Yeah. So there's that building, you saw, if you've seen people's mobile phone updates, we're going to get to a couple of them down here, like the likes of Taz returning in that building to get that enormous pop that he got. There's loads of things that Tony Khan, the fan, would have liked, and we talk a lot of times about how it's not just any old business billionaire that got into business, it's a fan as well.
He's one of the true freaks.
He gets this conversation that, as you pointed out, everybody's had about the small buildings. It's a game of percentages, isn't it? Like 4,000 people in a 4,500 seater place versus 4,000 in a 20,000 seater makes a world of difference. And let's be honest, sometimes we're not even talking as generous as 4,000 at this point. Yeah. That's going to happen. Like, the wrestling business isn't necessarily as cyclical as bookers would like to have you believe, but in business, historically, there are booms and busts and the like. And you can't just book a venue a month out. These things do tend to be, in the pipeline, often as long as like a year and a half. The point about the sets, I think, is one of the ones that maybe doesn't get discussed enough, because it's not just that big dynamite set that requires a big building. It's the big production trucks that carry that set that require the big car park of the big building. So all of these things need to be scaled down, like sensibly and pragmatically. As much as viewers, we kind of just want to see a hot wrestling show on a Wednesday night, there are these quite boring logistical things that take the time to play out as such. That's why you get Collision taking place in the summer residential, where they can kind of like set up shop for those months. It wasn't just something that they could just like, oh, we're just going to do this overnight. It's like, no, we'll book that residential well in advance.
We'll keep it here for 5 weeks.
Yeah, and like see how that feels, and that's how you get something. And that was super effective as well. The comparison last year for me was always WWE running Wembley in 92 and then moving to the Manhattan Centre for TV in 93. AEW has managed to do that with these massive stadium shows at Wembley, but acknowledging that it's time to sort of start shrinking that process.
Kind of like the exact same move that you just described. Yeah.
And honestly, like that was good for the perception of WWE back then, in the same way that I think it will be good for the perception of AEW in 2025. Hot buildings, hot crowds. We're only coming off the back of a smaller attended Dynamite that was like one of the better received one in months, realistically.
Yeah,
so it's never going to be the magic one fix to any company's problems, but just that vibe, feeling like it's a place you want to be. And the idea of sold out shows, hot tickets. Doesn't matter if it's small. If you're saying sold out, if you're saying, sorry, you can't get your hands, that again sort of creates interest and the market will respond to it and stuff like that. So only good things I think can come from these small events.
I think that the perception one, the perception problem is probably, I think it's the biggest issue that AEW has. That not like a lot of people talk about booking and people like coming on TV and going away and like inconsistencies and stuff. And I do think that those are valid problems. We speak about them at length. But I think the perception problem is the biggest challenge AEW faces going into 2025 now. I think that a combination of WWE getting so hot and getting so successful and like in terms of business metrics, you know, the arenas are packed, the crowds are loud and engaged. Yes, there's a bit of sweetening there, but it's WWE. They've done that for decades. That kind of perception of the number one becoming so like strongly viewed publicly. Also, the strength of WWE's PR team is like, you see it every single week. You see at least one thing goes out there, and like when you're trained to these things, you can kind of pick up on them, right? Like there was some stuff with the Fast Nationals for the Saturday night's main event that were clearly basura. So I don't have to swear.
Add that bit.
Yeah. And don't source me, by the way. Don't do that. But I'm not. Look, I'm not ripping WWE for that. That's good. They should have an effective functioning PR department. I think something that AEW could do a lot of in 2025 is actually learn from that, put some spin-based stuff out there, and actually work the PR game a little bit more. Because things like when these silly Fast Nationals come out, and they only come out for AEW and they paint them in a negative light, which you know where they're coming from. But there's a lot of stuff like that. The public perception of AEW is not strong at the moment, and if they're to recover, I think that actually running these smaller venues with hot crowds is a really good step and a good way to go. Hey, look, you know what they should be doing after this? They should have their own Chris Legental sending out emails to every media member going, the Hammerstein was a great success. We are so happy. The crowd were buzzing all night. It was a sellout, because I think they sold out their allocation for all three tapings.
All a game, innit?
Yeah, exactly. They should be putting that stuff right out there, because then that builds that perception up. And yes, it's all silly and it's all a game, but that's the business, son. And I do think that this is a really good step. So more Hammerstein.
Speaking of perception and the ways in which stories are spun, I think you're going to see a lot of negativity about this, but realistically there might be some positives too. AEW Rampage is done for the foreseeable future. Not our words, but the words of Tony Khan himself, as revealed by at Kimmy Sokol on Twitter, but obviously everybody else that was there in attendance at the Hammerstein for Tony Khan's traditional coming out and addressing the crowd. Confirming that Rampage is done for the foreseeable future, and kind of really confirming what everybody knew when the new television deal was announced and Rampage wasn't a part of it. It's obviously something AEW for the longest time really has just like stapled onto Dynamite as a taped show, rather than being something that it can concentrate its efforts on live. The early Dynamites was something of a success story. It was a big statement to be able to, just 2 years into business, following a pandemic no less, be able to get another hour of television with the network. The first episode was main evented by Kenny Omega versus Christian Cage, and then the second one, and obviously the most successful one, was the First Dance, the return of CM Punk. That episode of Rampage, much like that video on YouTube, I think will be clicked and rewatched forever and ever and ever and ever. They nailed it early doors. Punk was a Rampage exclusive wrestler that felt strategic for a little while, but as is often the case in wrestling, sometimes too much can be too much, and creatively Rampage's very existence only made something like Dark and Dark Elevation feel even more minor by comparison. Then the inclusion of Collision, again, more isn't always more in wrestling, further sort of bumped Rampage off to the side, which realistically had been happening for quite a while up to that point. Often you would see, I've been in attendance to one where matches take place in front of much smaller crowds, because crowds are worn down from Ring of Honor, from Dynamite, and it just became some of AEW's more inessential content, and it's one of the, often it's worse than being bad, is to be inessential. So yeah, despite some of the success stories, and certainly business-wise, one of the things that would have no doubt put AEW in good stead with WBD, we cannot forget about the television deal they got this year. Speaking of business metrics, one of the most successful of the year, but with that, Rampage will disappear, and Tony Khan pretty much confirming the inevitable over the weekend.
Yeah, last one at the Hammerstein. That's not a bad way to go out, is it? Yeah, I have mixed views on Rampage, like a lot of people. I don't think if you didn't watch Rampage every week, you weren't missing out on like the biggest storylines in AEW. But sometimes I actually think that worked to the show's benefit, because sometimes if AEW creative wasn't hitting for you at a certain point and you're not into the mainline feuds, you could just go and watch some wrestling on Rampage, brother. I thought it was a fun home for wrestlers I really enjoy, like the Butcher. People like Harley Cameron have wrestled lots of matches there, and she's obviously on the come up now and being recognised as an emerging talent. But there's lots of other examples as well. So I think it is a real shame to lose an hour of TV that got people on TV and like got some of my favourites on TV every single week. And I always get I'm not gonna lie. 52 weeks a year, I'm not watching every single minute of Rampage, but when the Butcher's on or Harley or someone else, I'm tuning in every single time. So, and I think that the past couple of weeks with the C2 and various other things going on Rampage has made it more of an appointment show. At the same time, it's very difficult to produce 1 hour, one weekly show of 2 hours, let alone adding an extra hour and then Collision on top. I think that Tony as a booker is probably stretched quite thin. He's got Ring of Honor as well. And I know he's got like 20 odd people helping him out there or whatever, but he's also got 7 jobs. So, there's a give and take on both sides. We'll see what happens with Shockwave in the new year. But for now, bye-bye Rampage. Lots of fond memories, like the Punk thing. Like I'll never forget that show. No. And things like Jamie Hayter re-debuted on Rampage, and there's lots of others over the years. But
there's going to be one of these days where you have to sort of remember how you felt about it in the moment. And as you point out, I totally agree. Not something that you could watch every week, and ultimately that can long term have a detrimental effect, because it does make the product feel less prestigious. Or if you're watching what doesn't necessarily scan as a particularly great show, you're like, AEW isn't as elite as I once wanted it to be. But there will one day be a best of Rampage comp that will be all killer, no filler, and people will look back very nostalgically on it. That will be how this thing goes.
The Blu-ray salesmen are going to be...
Oh, God, yeah. That's it, especially as we seemingly walk backwards into this era of going physical rather than digital again. Yeah, there will be some Rampage comps that are going to knock your socks off.
Those guys with their locked Twitter accounts are like, I'm not going to put anyone out there. Salute.
They know who they are, and we need to.
I love them. I absolutely love them.
Keeping the business alive.
But pour one out for Rampage. 5 hours of weekly TV is a lot. Yeah. I think that as content creators and people who talk about it, I think that if you just sit there and go, I've got to watch another bloody show, you come across like a miserable bugger. Yeah. Like, honest to God, like this is like the lowest stress job in the world compared to people who actually go out there and do something they hate every single day. Yeah. So like, I'd like to, I've been guilty of it in the past. I'd like to remove the whole, one more show, I've got to watch more wrestling for my job. I'd like to remove that from my lexicon and everyone else's.
I can't get enough of it.
Here he goes. This guy wants to watch a fair every day, baby.
Bring back WF Mania for me. I need a weekend wrap up with Todd in the studio. I'll take it off.
And then Code Orange kicking in, baby. that was awesome. That change of pace. Hello, welcome to your house NXT. Gangster. I loved it.
My neck still hasn't recovered from having a swivel.
I loved it. They should get even more extreme. Get like a dying fetus in or something. Why not?
Big fan.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Right. Okay. Dying fetus, Stout, and Code Orange in one video. Yeah. My agenda continues.
That's Christmas music. Come on.
Yeah, absolutely. We got some major doubts over WWE Raw, specifically the length of the show. So it was confirmed over the weekend that SmackDown is going to be 3 hours when we move over to the various different rights deals that still confuse me, because UK is different to the US and all this stuff.
Most place in the world, and then fittingly it's USA in USA,
in the
isn't it?
Yeah, for a little bit longer. So SmackDown's going to 3 hours, but we still don't really know about Raw. This is a report from Fightful Select. They spoke to a bunch of talent who were at WWE Raw, the last one before Christmas. They've taped everything, of course. Talent weren't told exactly how long Raw's going to be when they hit Netflix. When they asked, Fightful have asked this over the past few months, they haven't really gotten an answer. One source stated that Netflix has no hard outs, which means when it hits 11 p.m. they don't have to cut it. Which means, it's an on-demand streaming platform.
Yeah.
It can be as long as they want. There's no schedule to adhere to. So it sounds like there'll be a bit of flexibility. SmackDown has been announced for 3 hours, as we've mentioned, but they're still waiting on word for Raw. Talent are on Christmas break. They're not back until Boxing Day for the holiday tour. So there you go. We don't know if Raw's going to be 3 hours or 2 hours yet.
By the way, you seen what the Feds advertised for the Garden on Boxing Day?
CM Punk versus...
Ludwig Kaiser, oh my God. It's like the Dominic Mysterio match last year. I need the full version of that breaking out on like a fan cam or something. ASAP, thank you. I'll take it. This is one of the million unprecedented and cool things, I guess, about, well, depending on your flavour of wrestling taste, cool things about WWE on Netflix and wrestling, indeed, on a service like Netflix. SmackDown being 3 hours and us getting that news makes sense. It's a television network. There are still sponsors and advertisers to cater to in America, and I dare say USA Network won't have too much of a problem with a reliable brand giving them an extra hour of TV each week, so they'll be pretty happy with that.
WWE is frequently their strongest performing, one of their strongest performing things. So
it's outside of that 5-year gap in the early 2000s. It's a 40-year relationship, so everybody be happy at that end that the 3 hours is rubber stamped and confirmed. On Netflix, though, a lot of uncharted territory and kind of all more interesting if you I guess if you're watching this channel and you're interested in that kind of the back end of the business as well and the metrics and all the sort of how these things are going to work. We used to talk on the WWE network of faceless executives that were buzzing that you there just watched an extra hour of content for their bonuses or whatever. Maybe that's the same on Netflix, so maybe sometimes a Raw going 2+ hours, 3+ hours, going what we would consider an overrun in the traditional sense, now just being the norm. Maybe it's better with the live viewers than it is the people that watch the next day. All that stuff, I imagine, will be data that Netflix will be monitoring very closely. Because, again, unlike most of the things on Netflix, this is both a live and on-demand offering. You don't get many films that have a launch moment where they track the people that watch it live. It just appears on your Netflix dashboard. WWE is going to be both. And it's like Netflix having a go with live sport. We've seen they've done it with the boxing. They're probably using WWE a bit to see if they've got the muscle and the production to manage something like, I don't know, the Premier League or the NFL or who knows what. There's so much to this that I think we're going to learn as we go by maybe monitoring how they do this. And WWE's no different. They'll be so used to producing for tight outs or for the overrun they've been permitted by the network or commercial breaks even. Look at how TV wrestling and how many wrestlers have said how much they had to adjust to wrestling to ad breaks rather than just having a match. Maybe that's going to change as well because of the Netflix advertising model and how they all sort of shift it up. It's going to be fascinating to see the changes that take place from a production standpoint if you're into this sort of thing. And I'm just curious to watch it. WWE are the tightly run ship. We talked so much about Saturday night's main event and how the impact Dick Ebersol had on WWE full stop. This could be one of those. Yeah, so big Nigel Netflix. Big Nige. Big Nige. He could be the next Dick Ebersol. Wow, what a segment. We'll get him on the channel in the new year. Nigel Netflix. Big Nige, what's up? It's like the guy who invented Apple, Steve Apple. Steve Apple, Nigel Netflix, all the big hits. Fiona Apple, that's the wife of Steve. Indeed. Jeezy peeps. We're going to look, this is all a bit of fun, but what I'm about to talk about next isn't, unfortunately. If you, like the rest of us, were mega hyped by the fantastic Bandido videos that have been airing on Dynamite of late, you might have been thrilled, or not, I guess, as the case may be, to see him return, weirdly, at Ring of Honor over the weekend. He returned at Final Battle, which, again, because of all of his stuff's been on AEW, a little bit surprising, but he returned at Final Battle to make the save for Matt Cardona when Chris Jericho and the Learning Tree were laying the beat down in on him after Jericho's victory over Cardona in the Ring of Honor World title match. Well, if you haven't seen it yet, go and check it out for yourself, but it all immediately looks a bit off. He hits a springboard dropkick on Chris Jericho, and you can see the Learning Tree lined up to bump and feed for the returning babyface. However, Bandido doesn't move at first as an attempt to communicate with the referee. He's very shaky getting back to his feet. He's able to do one more fairly limp-looking move on Chris Jericho. Big Bill, I think, takes him into the corner as an extremely gentle with him. They just about get away with the clear in the ring spot, but if you've watched any wrestling ever, your eyes will be trained to it. And you're like, what's going on there? Well, his eyes are more trained than Dave Meltzer's, and he was able to kind of come through with a bit of a report to kind of clarify what we were all worried about. Quote, "We are told Bandido did suffer a concussion on Friday night on the back of his head after a missile dropkick on Chris Jericho. Obviously, Jericho versus Bandido was scheduled for a Ring of Honor title match at some point, but with concussions, you don't know how far or long that means somebody will be out of action." He's had to return from double wrist surgery, obviously, from last year, so a rough run anyway that was keeping Bandido out, but just to look at the build-up they'd given him, like these videos were so well received. It's not something AEW even does very often.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Ring of Honor return was strange, but you're thinking he's a former Ring of Honor world champion. Maybe he's the guy to dethrone Jericho, and they're going to go with him possibly as a leader of that brand again. Kind of couldn't have gone worse all the way around this.
What rotten luck. Out for like a year, comes back, gets concussed straight away. And concussions are so variable. It could be 2 weeks or it could be, ages, forever. Awful. This guy's had some terrible luck with the wrist stuff, keeping him out. I think in COVID he had at least one really bad bout with when that virus was at its absolute peak. He's had to go through a lot to get to where he is today, and it sucks because he's an absolutely great professional wrestler. Stuff like this, look, wrestling is inherently dangerous, and concussions do happen, but when they happen in a situation like this, it's just so ill-timed and sad in a lot of ways because the guys had to sit at home for so long. I'm very excited to see Bandido back, whenever that may be now. I think that the Ring of Honor thing, it is curious that you'd put the vignettes on Dynamite and then re-debut on a different brand. I think that's a worthy conversation. I do take the argument, however, that he's a former Ring of Honor World Champion. He was also part of the all-time Frankenstein's monster stable that was Lifeblood. Who else? Juice Robinson, Mark Haskins,
Bandido.
I can't even remember.
It's going to be something I watch when we come out of the studio.
It was such a peculiar stable because Juice had his big top hat on, and here's Bandido looking really cool.
Was he not the first kind of official Tony Khan Ring of Honor World Champion because he beat Jonathan Gresham, and that had a bit of a chain of events after the fact, didn't it?
Yeah,
he strapped up Bandido. They did a unification match. And that was Tony Khan's right, I'm getting started now with my ROH sort of thing. So I think he was. I think he's a Tony Khan guy.
Yeah, I'd say so.
But
he's been signed there for ages. Just best wishes to Bandido. What a rubbish thing. I hope it's on the easier end of the concussion scale, because these things can sideline people for a long time, but obviously hope that's not the case. Anyway, thank you for joining us today. This guy will be back tomorrow. I will not. This is it. I'm done. I'll see you guys in 2025. And you'll see this video in 2024 because that is still the year. See you later.